introduction. Boy, yesterday was really an interesting day, wasn't it? Rick Bragg, I thought, was just outstanding. I thought he was real fun to listen to. It was engaging as well. Plus our little outing last night. I want to thank, Dalton for inviting me here, and also it's quite an incentive to have La Jolla or Torrey Pines is the next one, so you kind of motivate all the speakers to do real well so they get invited back. So it's a good idea. But thank you for inviting me. Thank you for our partnership with MST. I'm with Experian Decision Analytics. They call me a senior business process consultant. Senior probably because I'm gray and bald and been around a while. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background later on. But I did want to also thank Mike. You're back there at your computer, but I enjoyed that music really well last night. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. And of course, I've got two of my colleagues here. Where are you guys? Oh, right here in front of me. Dan, thanks for that bottle of wine. I really didn't need that, but that's okay. And then you helped me finish off my bread pudding, which was really, I didn't need that either. So if you go to Crab Daddy's, try the bread pudding. It's outstanding. Anyway, a little background. I go way back. I think one of the reasons Dalton invited me is that last year when we talked to the RMA user conference, I told him that I went to the University of Georgia for 2 years. We came to a mutual agreement, me and University of Georgia, that I should go elsewhere later on. So I wasn't exactly your scholar at the time. At that time, I think Sports Illustrated had the top 20 party schools listed, and they had an asterisk at #1, and that asterisk was down at the bottom column and said we did not include the University of Georgia because we don't include professionals and amateur polls like this. So I was in that era, and there's a lot of stories in it. But the end result is I ended up moving to Houston. Ended up moving to Houston, working, quite frankly, I was digging ditches in August in heat and humidity that this is nothing compared to what you deal with in Houston. So it inspired me to go back to school and finish, and I finished at the University of Houston. And of course, after getting my degree, thinking I actually knew something, I decided, well, I'm gonna go work somewhere. So it was in accounting, and I started working for an engineering firm, but then ultimately needed to venture out and got into oil field supply business. Fluor, a lot of you from California know Fluor. They had an oil field supply division, and that oil field supply division started from virtually in a 2 or 3 year period from 0 sales to 500 million to 0 sales. They ended up divesting themselves of us because the bust hit in the 80s, and we all know what that's like. So I was talking to a friend, and I said, you know, I got 3 kids. I got to get a job. My wife's taking care of the kids at home, and I got to find something. And I'm tired of this up and down. And he said, well, why don't you get in banking? You won't make much money, but it'll be safe. And this was in 1980 in Houston, Texas, Southeast Texas. So I went to work for an SNL. It was really a roller coaster ride. So I ended up worked for a real good firm at the time, which ultimately was the best. Went under as well. I've got a bad track record, it seems like it's starting up, but what was the most fascinating thing about that adventure is I got in as budget manager, got in there, went on to the treasury area and started learning more about the wholesale side of the bank. And it was fascinating to me because I would look at the asset side and the liability side and try and manage things as we went forward. Well, lo and behold, the bust hit. You know, $700 million CRE portfolio, all in the tank. Yeah, you must have lived through it too, because you're sweating inside. It was very, very bad time. And I noticed that they've got a lot of us Texas speakers here. That's because we screwed things up so badly that at least we knew how to get out of it eventually at some point in time. But it went under too. So visualize this. We're all lined up in a hallway. At the very end, there's somebody sitting at a desk. I always equated to Timothy Geithner was at the end of the hallway. You walk up, tell them your name, you point one way. Next person up, point the other way. all the way through the line. Well, as it turned out, these people had a job. These people did. That's the most horrifying thing. But what amazed me about it is I couldn't understand, how did this come about? Why did everything fall out? Why did everything come to fruition like this? So I was interested in our pricing policy, quite frankly. Finally ended up with another bank. We ended up buying the 1 Point Baker Hill suite, which includes several modules, one being pricing and profitability. It's now Baker Hill is part of the Experian Group. We have encapsulated the same philosophies of pricing inside the software that we offer. But once I implemented it at that bank, we started moving along and I started to understand pricing more and more. Now what's real interesting and what I think that you guys are facing is, one of the things that I had to deal with was I was willing to do pretty much anything. So the management would say, okay, well, let's get John to do this, a new project. If he screws it up, we'll get rid of him. Just let him do it. So I ended up doing this, treasury management group, secondary marketing group, you name it. I got all the way around the bank. I think you guys are faced. I'm almost convinced that if I was still with the bank today, they said, well, let's get John to do this ALL stuff. And if he screws it up, we'll get rid of him. But I think you guys are faced with that today. I think there's so many things that I've listened to, made my head hurt yesterday, because the details are just amazing, plus the ambiguity of it all. So I don't envy you in the task ahead, but at the same note, it's going to be fascinating. So much for that life story. So why is it important to know pricing? Well, to make money, of course, but really what's interesting to know is that every bank out there has a tendency when margins are starting to narrow up or we're not making the money that we're hitting our projections, what's the first thing they do? They cut overhead expenses, they cut operating expenses. But an increase of 2.5% in loan interest income equates to a gain of 7% in income. $1 in added pre-tax income is almost $3 in added earnings. Yet a 2.5% increase in operating expenses, decrease in operating expenses, would only increase net income by 2.5%. Pricing is almost 3 times as powerful as expense reductions and the potential impact on earnings. And it's pretty easy to do the math. First thing everybody does, cut the operating expenses. What I suggest, look at pricing closer. 2.5%, that's very little. We're talking about 10 basis points or something, depending on what interest rate cycle you're in, or dollar amount you're in. Very little. So the power of pricing needs to be emphasized more and more. I know we'll talk about a little bit more about what the reaction to it is, but it's what the lender's reaction to it is. But at the same note, it's something that gets overlooked on an ongoing basis. And I didn't put this in twice for emphasis. I just didn't edit my slideshow very well. So why the amplified interest in pricing today? Strategic reasons, margin compression, relationship management purposes, risk management purposes, performance measurement, return on shareholders' equity, and of course, business and marketing strategies can be derived from your pricing approach. I did remember one thing from when I was at the University of Georgia. It was a professor that came up and said this, and I don't know why I remembered it, but he said margins will continue to narrow forever. Not just continue to narrow forever. Once a product becomes a commodity, it will continue to narrow and narrow and narrow. You've seen it in car loans, you've seen it in houses, you've seen anytime they securitize something, the margins get narrower and narrower. And condos on the commercial side, commercial real estate side. I remember when we used to buy, I used to also buy whole loans for the bank. And then we would buy commercial real estate loans. And we'd hope to get 2 basis points over the index. It narrowed down to less than 200 by the time it was all over and done with for me. So they have continued to narrow forever. And here's an example of why he was right. And this guy, I don't know why I remembered it. Since 2010, and the first part of 2014, margins have dropped 100 basis points. That's a lot. Now, some people have been a little more aggressive, and some people have been a little more active in fee income, and they've kind of tried to hold on. But margins themselves continue to narrow. Now, I think later on today, somebody's talking about it as well, and you'll see a little bit of an uptick in their graphs, but at the same note, it's gone down, gone down, gone down, gone down. Isn't that happy news? I always like to bring the good stuff in. Okay, truths about pricing, how it will be impacted. Regulations will heighten competitive pressures. This is, got a little story to tell. Excuse me, I gotta get my glasses off because I can't see this stuff. One of the things that amazed me about stories that Bragg told is that we have no idea if all of it's true, but it's great storytelling. And I tell stories every once in a while as well, but not to that dimension. But if my wife's there, about halfway through the story, says, "That's not exactly right." You know, said, "Okay, fine here, but we just met this guy in the grocery line. He doesn't really know one way or the other, so it's a good story." Anybody have a spouse like that? quick hand up there. So she's a tax accountant, just to give you a little more information. So that explains it. Oh, that's got a tax accountant wife there too, or girlfriend, one or the other. But anyway, after tax season, we always go. We go somewhere because she's fried. She's like doing 4 hours of a 1 hour seminar in the afternoon, kind of like you guys do. She's just worn out by the time tax season comes. So we decided to go to Napa Valley, and we met brother-in-laws and what have you. Brother-in-law, sister-in-law, two of them, 2 pairs, and then her brother. Had a wonderful time, sat around enjoying the wine, enjoying the outdoors. I showed Dan and Jeff pictures of it the other day, or yesterday. Great place. We had leased a house, and we're just sitting out on the patio. So Bob was the chief risk officer for a large bank, and we started talking about, the regulatory climate, what it's doing to the banks. And so that tells you how exciting our weekends on the patio. So at the same note, we were enjoying that and a little wine, and he said, "Here, I'm going to give you something." And I said, "Well, why don't you join me? You can tell this yourself." He said, "No, I don't do that." He said, "I'll give you this. You condense it into a shortened version, and I think it makes the point about how regulations will heighten competitive pressure." This was of a competitor of theirs, and it was their CEO discussing what he called adapting to the new global financial architecture. Large as large as they get are banks, national banks, international banks. While we will still meet all of our new capital and liquidity requirements this year, we still have an enormous amount of work to do to conform and adapt to the plethora of new global rules. I've never used plethora as a statement. I don't know if y'all have. It's great. I like that. We are applying enormous resources to the task. Time, money, and manpower being applied to adapt to the new rules. 13,000 employees added from 2012 to 2014 to support our regulatory compliance and control effort across the entire firm, and include risk, compliance, legal, finance, technology, oversight and control, and audit. 500 professionals and thousands of contributors were dedicated to the 2013 resubmission and 2014 submission of the Federal Reserve's Capital Stress Test, or CCAR. 500 professionals globally are working on the firm's annual recovery and resolutions plan. 400 people are dedicated to continue to build on our liquidity risk management infrastructure. 250 employees are working in the model risk and development. 600+ million has been spent on technology focused on our agenda in the regulatory and control area. These are just the additional resources. 20 to 30% of the control effort employees have been reassigned and will be devoted to this effort. He goes on to say, all things being equal, returns will be reduced. What a surprise, yeah. And I think he did 2 things. He was trying to do 2 things in this particular instance. Outline the enormity of the task ahead for each and every one of us. Obviously, this is a huge bank, so it has a lot of other things to do, but we all face that. And also, he was setting expectations to the market. Margins will narrow. It's not going to get any better. So, on that second happy note, I'll just carry on. I just thought it was fascinating how regulations will heighten competitive pressures. It will, because you're going to have to do this stuff, and obviously somebody's going to pay for it somewhere. Rank order of risk in pricing and profitability is important. Yes, absolutely. It's important to incorporate risk. I think that's why most of you folks are here. Know the return you're getting back of the napkin isn't good enough anymore. You don't know how many times when I would deal with some our banks throughout the U.S., I can just do it on the back of the napkin. They said, yeah, I can do it just on the back of the napkin too, but you really need to know. So when we try and sell them our pricing system, they said, wouldn't you really want me to know and be consistent in what you're looking at as you go forward? And of course, yeah, but I can do it on the back of the napkin. Additional production can not only have a positive influence, it can have a negative as well, and that's something you have to be mindful of. Why is it important to address? Pricing is important to address because it's equally unfair to all. It provides a consistency in comparing business and loan returns. It provides a scale to use in managing customer relationships, key to a lot of banks today. I have my own opinions on that sometimes, but at the same note, it seems to be prevalent throughout the industry that we want to measure relationships or potential relationships. Provides a risk-adjusted view of loan and relationship returns, enhances lender knowledge. This is, to me, a key. It's something that needs to be emphasized. It enhances a lender's knowledge and ability to basically structure a loan, or reconsider other structure. Too many times that over the years we've made our lenders more salesmen than lenders, and it's affected the industry in itself in two ways. One, they used to be the advisor to a lot of companies, and now they no longer do that. It's kind of fallen to the accountants to take care of that, or the CPAs to take care of that. And also, they don't know how to structure something to make it profitable and make a customer happy at the same time. Enables risk-adjusted and profit-based reporting, and it's indifferent to whether you do the loan. It's simply a measure. A measure of value does not dictate the offered rate. So many times the clients that I work with will go in and implement a pricing system, and the end result is they'll have a targeted return, and they won't hit it, and it's like, well, we can't do it. I said, well, why not? It doesn't hit the return target. I said, that doesn't mean anything. That's just a measure. This is what you'll get. Now, whether or not you need to do the loan, you have to make a decision outside. There's other mitigating circumstances. But all you're finding is a measure of value associated with this loan, and if you feel there are other reasons, well, by all means, do it. So it's indifferent. It's just showing you a measure of value. How many times I've run into that? It's ridiculous. Really? Okay. It's raining outside. Do you stay inside all day? What fuels the returns? Critical attributes. Interest rates, cost of funds, cost of deposits are commonly known now today as FTP. Probably most of you use funds transfer pricing in your bank today. Interesting concept that's come over the years. I really like it primarily because it gives equal value to the deposit side of the bank versus just the lending side. Forever, the loan officers or the lending side would get all the value added. But in reality, they had to have money to lend, so they got it from the deposit side. The tricky thing about FTP systems is you have to watch whoever the central funding unit is and make sure they're not making more money than everybody else. It's skimming off the top there. Non-interest income, expense, risk expense, spreads, gross margin, net interest margin, and net income. Pretty straightforward, nothing fancy. Looking at a single loan. Sorry, group on the right, brethren number 19, I'm sorry, got my back to you. Proposed loan, this is just pro forma, outstanding balance, interest rates, cost of funds, non-interest expense if you get any, your risk premium or risk expense associated with it. I think if I was to say the three most important things on this particular graph and what I will talk about today is your, not a, well, yeah, cost of fund, but risk expense, the non-interest expense, and then of course the capital associated with it. And we're going to talk at length about those two. Pretty straightforward, pro forma, easy to do, back of the napkin stuff. But those three components are really tough to deal with. And of course, critical measures, return on assets, ROA, net income divided by average assets, ROE, everybody knows this in RAROC. RAROC becoming certainly more in vogue. And of course, that's basically your ROA divided by economic capital. And I'll talk about economic capital in a minute. So what's important to the regulators? I don't know, we need to ask those guys over there. What I think is important to the regulator, well, all this came about because of Basel 1, 2, and 3 over the years, and the introduction of the 3 pillars. Concept, minimal capital requirements, which took into consideration capital, market, and operational risk. Gave them the supervisory tools they needed, and then of course disclosure requirements, which basically, in essence, made it a fair investing field. You know, you need to disclose certain things so that everybody has equal opportunity to review and understand what an entity's like and whether or not they would invest in it. And then of course, Basel III comes along, and mandatory capital conservation, and discretionary countercyclical buffer, as well as a minimum leverage ratio and two required liquidity ratios. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but I think those are probably the key.
John?
Yes?
Do you see banks implementing RAROC? If they do, who do they use?
Well, the banks that I've worked with, I've got a hodgepodge. I've got some that have embraced it and moved forward, and others still use standard capital and straight line capital. I think you need to move them because, as I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, it's really a measure of risk. You still have to deal with regulatory capital, there's no question about it. But it helps you from a risk management perspective to understand what your portfolio looks like from a risk standing, and how you can take it to your, actually it'll be to your advantage from a pricing perspective as well. This is kind of an evolutionary slide. I find it real interesting. Any of y'all know, any banks still use like a straight 8% as their underlying? We used to do it, use it as our denominator on ROE. We use 8%, well-capitalized bank, that's what we always used to use. I can imagine how much business we lost because of that. As it has evolved, capital has evolved over time. We've seen a stair-step effect come into place. And now we're starting to see a curvilinear influence as a result of economic capital being deployed elsewhere. The IRB Basel II allowed for this curvilinear impact on the higher to the lower grade categories. And this is more realistic because, you know, if you've got a CD secured loan, why do you need 8% capital behind it? What do they look for? The regulators, I don't know, once again, I'll ask them, but what I've come to find is that they employ a dual risk rating system, application of economic capital. I don't know if the regulators themselves want economic capital to be utilized as much as once again, I think it's a measure of risk. And then performing migration analysis, which we talked about in our session. I think it was you, Stephen. Talked a little bit about that in your session yesterday. Okay, so what is dual risk ratings? Well, pretty simple. IRS standards requires more granularity. We talked a little bit about that yesterday at length. Risk ratings within specific asset classes, adequate systems to capture it. That's the key. You got to have systems to capture this information because they're wanting you to retain more and more as we go along. The first rating looks at the borrower's risk and the potential loss there. And facility rating differentiates risk associated with types of loans, which becomes instrumental in supporting the ALLL calculations and capital estimates. Foundation, and of course, establishing a good grading system such as this is a great foundation for subsequent loan review and consistency in how things are being applied. LGD, PD, EL. Probability of default, the risk presented by the borrower, loss given default. facility rating differentiates risk associated with different loans. Obviously, a CRE, or a commercial C&I, or unsecured, they're all different in terms of their risk or loss given default, or their probability of default. Exposure at default, expected loss equals probability default times loss given default times EAD, exposure at default. And obviously with an increased risk and lower quality graded loans, or loans will be higher loss severity associated with it. I'll show you a little chart here. A lot of numbers, I know. On the left side, probability default. The right side, facility increasing as loss given default. Part of our partnership in working with MSD is to, they provide us this information so we can encapsulate it in our pricing system. And by just getting this information in there, and ultimately expected loss, which is in the middle, provides you a lot of flexibility in your pricing structure, underlying pricing structure itself. And you can address it in a variety of forms and types. The variety of pools that they come up with help me a lot. We need to talk more about that, because I used to have to just produce this myself. Credit risk migration analysis, not for the birds anymore. Effective stress testing begins with a quality internal rating system, so it's all kind of tying together here. Our risk attributes can change and loan grades will be impacted as we move along and price it. You see the history that Stephen and a few other folks talked about yesterday, and it starts to change things. Capital charges will change with that. You need to identify the impact of credit migration on a loan category itself. And then, of course, detailed analysis of loans within a portfolio can be crucial in positioning oneself for long-term profitability. So if you know what you're dealing with, you can at least position yourself from a marketing perspective to address it. Now, I will tell you this, in this portion of my slide presentation, you folks know more about CECL and everything else than I do. I know how to use it within a pricing component. I know if there's anything that you need to remember, is it needs to be, it can no longer be just reactive. It can be it has to have predictive. It has to be predictive with certain rules and grades associated with it. And I know Stephen talked about it, everybody's talked about it. And I'm not gonna go into great detail about CECL because you know more about it than I do, believe it or not. I just know where to use it when I go pricing. Again. I heard that in one of this. I heard all this in one of my sessions, in the sessions I sat through, so I don't want to bore you with it. Fundamental components dealing with the ongoing FASB proposed general risk factors, specific risk factors, directional consistency. That's one of those words I want to hear. Margins will never narrow forever. Directional consistency. I think if you want to take any items back with you to remember, those are the two. And then economic capital. Ultimately, as the expected loss changes and those factors change, you're going to make adjustments going forward. If it's good enough for the Phoenicians, what is this economic capital thing that we talked about? Believe it or not, I threw it in the Phoenicians because they used to measure loss severity based upon illness of their workers or the weather. And they would come up with a yield, a return on their crops. So using economic capital goes way back. The primary value of economic capital is its application, decision-making, and overall risk management. And I might emphasize, it is not, well, where is it? Economic capital is the amount of money which is needed to secure the survival in a worst case scenario. It is buffer against expected shocks in market values. It is a measure of risk, not capital held. That's what I was trying to find. It's a measure of risk, not capital held. It enhances risk management efforts by basically providing a common indicator for any and or all types of loans. and provides you a pricing metrics that includes expected and unexpected losses as well. Yeah. You asked if anybody uses it. Does anybody know if they use economic capital? Are there any pricing geeks in here like me? Yep, same guy that was at RMA. Nobody. That's okay. It all works together. So how do we come up with this is the mystery box here. See, now I was going to pick on you today. I was going to say, okay, you're a Georgia Tech guy. I'm going to give you two numbers. Calculate this real quick. A Georgia guy can do that. Georgia Tech guy. He's not agreeing. That's okay. Pretty straightforward. What I wanted to present here is just it is a calculation. It's largely based on PD and LGD, as we've talked about before. It goes through, there's a retail exposure as well as commercial exposure, but it's something that you can calculate. It's just a matter of trying to identify those pools and applying it accordingly, getting the right information associated with those pools. And then you come up with economic capital calculation, the mystery box. And here's an example of it. We've got charted risk rates along the side here, along the top, with average probability default. I've mapped it against external rating agency letters. So. And then to the left, we got facility grades, and associated loss given defaults. Basically, you take those two, throw them through the box, and you come out with these numbers. The mystery box comes up with your numbers. As you can see, it's varied. It jumps on these lower levels from an economic capital perspective. Lower grade, better graded loans don't require much economic capital. Bear in mind, it's a measure against a portfolio, and what influence it will have on a portfolio, not necessarily the loan by itself. And here's a look at it. What advantage do you think you would have here? If you use straight 8% capital, 6% capital, I don't care what you use in your calculation. Where do you see the advantages? And where do you see the disadvantages? You're asking too much for what's at risk, and then you're not paying enough, or not getting paid enough for what is risky. That has a big influence, and there's some calculations that we can go through. Single loan. Now here's one of my other, no, next slide's got a typo. Basically, I'm doing a comparative here of two loans, or 4.5% and 6%. Pretty sizable difference rate in the interest rate. But when you take into the risk component, the PD, LGD, and you see that the effect is risk of loss on one's $2,000 versus 46, the RAROC calculation is quite different, even though you're getting 150 basis points more in rate. Not quite getting enough, are we? And this is a portfolio. This is the other typo. I'll fix this one up. Yes, $1 billion is going to make more than 100 million, so we're going to. Same philosophy, same approach. Risk-adjusted return on capital for a riskier loan versus a less risky loan. If you were just going to do a straight equity charge, your return 14.38 versus 12.5. What's the influence? Pretty interesting. And believe it or not, this is not unusual. That flat capital charge that people use just doesn't help you in terms of assigning risk to a particular loan. So we've come full circle. We've talked about risk factors, periodically measured and applied in some form or fashion. And they're adjusted directionally consistent with whatever revealed. And then capital allocations are adjusted accordingly. And that's, of course, the ALLL within the context of all of this. So knowing how pricing works is powerful. If you price effectively and adapt over time, you'll have more better view of not only what the marketplace will have, but what the risk within your portfolio will be, and what you should be paid in order for the bank to not only continue to grow and be profitable, but at the same note, try and cover itself, because you want to be paid for the risk you're absorbing as you go forward. A lot of times you have that competitive pressure where you're pricing against somebody that's doing something ridiculous. But at the same note, we're kind of in strange times, and part of the pricing pressures that you've seen out there are not a result of doing the math properly. It's a result of having excess cash on hand, and they got to do something with it. And that excess cash, if they invest it in security, they're getting 50 to 75 basis points. They might want a loan that they're going to get 150 basis points for, or 100 basis points for that matter. So they'll actually offer a better rate. And that's some of the craziness that's going on. It actually went on back in the 80s when I was starting. They would come up with ridiculous pricing. So you got to price effectively and then adapt over time as things change and the dynamics change. You can still be competitive and profitable. There's certainly ways of structuring things to be effective. And effective stress testing begins with quality internal rating systems themselves. You need to know what your portfolio looks like, and you need to be looking at it on an ongoing basis and adjusting accordingly. Capital charges will change. Risk attributes will change. I have identified the relevant loss discovery period. That was that's another one that needs to be, although I know Graham talked about that actually in the RMA, and that was really interesting. Detailed analysis of the loans within a portfolio can be crucial in positioning oneself for long-term profitability. And if you employ a methodology, you need it for monitoring, you need to do it for yesterday, today, and tomorrow as we go forward. And that's it. Do I have any questions? Questions? Any questions?
We've got a couple here.
Okay.
First one is dual risk grade seemed to have been the trend a few years ago, but not as much lately. Are many banks still migrating?
Yes.
John, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Dual risk rating was a trend for a while, but it seemed to die down. And are there any people migrating? I think yes and no. I think it's being asked of them to do that. At the very least, to become more granular. And if you're going to come up with a more consistent CD/LGD application, discover and get your expected loss figures accurately, I think yes.
Yeah, the other we've got is this just a good idea, or are you working with many banks that are using the ALLL in this way?
Using what?
Using the ALLL in this way, so using the allowance in this.
Oh, and you know, the objective isn't to manage or manipulate the allowance. It's to understand what's at risk more than anything else. So, yeah, well, in our pricing model I work with very often, we have what we call decision tables, and those decision tables take into consideration based upon product type, down as far as you want to be, loss given default, probability of default, exposure default. I'm working on several right now. We're using every one of those things, and it's going to continue to grow, I think, over time. I think it's going to be expected. Any other questions by chance? All right. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, if we go ahead and hook up Bart, folks, would you take just a minute and let's stand up. Just stand up. All right, everybody stand. Not everybody standing. Okay, stand up just for a minute. Why don't you take a second? I know you've met everyone at your table. Turn to the table next to you. Say hello to your neighbor. Somebody you hadn't met. Shake their hand.
happens sometimes. Like when I'm here, it's just to it.
All right, everybody, let's go back to our seats, if you would. Just have a seat. Good break. All right, let's have a seat. We'll get started again.